You are now listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. On today's program, we're going to specifically take a deep dive into the area of AI, artificial intelligence. In fact, the artificial intelligent war against you. Now, that's not a statement based on paranoia. That's a statement based on a reality, a factual, substantive analysis of the fact that AI is not some neutral, cybernetic, robotic system that is operating solely on the laws of logic. If you think that AI is simply thinking, and I use the words in quotation marks, if you think AI is simply thinking and evaluating based on logic, reason, and factual knowledge, you are greatly mistaken, and you're setting yourself up to be enslaved. Again, this is not a statement conjured up from paranoia. I know what I'm talking about. I've done my homework, and I have been privately experimenting with AI in the sense that I have been talking to right now it's just two AI engines, two AI systems. One I won't name at the moment, but it's a big one. And the other is Grok. And I guess I was drawn to Grok because I assumed Grok would be the fairest AI system to deal with because it was a offshoot of Elon Musk and his various business ventures. But the first thing I discovered when I talked to AI, and I talked to AI about my books and my ideas, not in some insane quest for affirmation from a robot. No, that's not why I contacted the AI engine. I wanted to see AI, in part, represents the collective hive mind. AI represents the collective world brain. Now, hive mind think of a hive mind in the most simple sense of the definition. Think of a beehive, and there's all these bees buzzing around, and they have all these different jobs, and they're guarding the mother bee, and they're producing honey, and the various bees go out, and I don't know how they pollinate the flower, but they pollinate the flower, and in the end product, they end up making honey, and that's what people do who process honey and cultivate beehives. I remember I had to get rid of a beehive, and in the state of California, this is like highly dangerous. And I really wasn't in a hurry to look up all the laws. All I knew is that if I allowed this beehive to flourish after a neighbor complained to me, there exists the possibility that if somebody is stung by a bee who is allergic to bees, that they could potentially have a very negative, serious medical reaction to being stung. And when you live in Southern California, this is like living in a combination of Blade Runner, the movie, and living in Southern California is also a combination of living, let's say, in communist Cuba. What is rational is not what is pursued. What is politically correct or, the latest and greatest ideology of environmentalism, that is pursued. But here you face a moral dilemma. I didn't really have time to have to spend all my I don't have spare time, but to spend all my time trying to meet the requirements of environmentalism. I had to make a decision. A neighbor complained to me about the beehive, since it was actually between our two property lines. But since I guess part of it seemingly originated on my property line, he didn't even have to say it. I knew from living in California for a while now, in my opinion, our biggest product or service that we sell in California is not automobiles. It's not the music industry. It's lawsuits. We have a parasite culture in California. A parasite culture is that our primary economic engine, and to be fair, it's one of numerous primary economic engines, is lawsuits, lawyers, ambulance chasers. You turn on television in California, the two overwhelmingly TV spots or TV commercials that you're going to see bombarding you will be one of two products. One, television commercials for attorneys, personal injury attorneys, attorneys to sue Big Pharma. And then Big Pharma takes out a massive number of commercials. So why do we have television saturated, and billboards and all kinds of things? Why do they, and social media and computers? Why do attorneys ads and personal injury ads in California dominate advertising? Because it's our biggest industry. So you see, that is not a healthy economy. You have a small percentage of the people making a lot of money, living very high living lifestyles, and they don't sell a legitimate product or service. They sell an exploitation service where in some cases people are not being justifiably remunerated after they've been hit by a car or something. So there's a legitimate case. There's a legitimate time for a lawsuit, especially if somebody of lesser economic means is being picked on by somebody of higher economic means or a giant corporation. And let's just take the automobile industry. The automobile industry in California sells all different kinds of automobiles. So if somebody is injured on the highway or freeway due to a defect in an automobile, well, good luck if the injured person, who might even be the family of an injured person, because somebody may be killed, paralyzed, seriously injured, or whatever, due to a defect in the manufacturing. Now, that is, in my opinion, a moral and ethical, that I believe is moral and ethical to utilize a personal injury attorney with ethics to make sure you get remunerated for being seriously injured by a defective automobile. That's legitimate. But the fact of the matter is that an overwhelming percentage, and I don't know what the exact percentage is, but an overwhelming percentage of all these personal injury cases are based on not legitimate grievances, but the desire to falsify what happened to you, the desire to exaggerate what happened to you in terms of injury, the desire to place the blame on the other person when in fact you knew you were responsible for the accident. And so there's all these people trying to work the system, and the way they work the system is they use high-priced personal injury attorneys that will participate in the game of falsifying information and all kinds of stuff to win massive financial awards for themselves and then their client. Well, that when you have a powerful industry like attorneys, and again, there are many times there's a legitimate moral, ethical, and legal need to hire a personal injury attorney if you have not gotten justice and you've been wronged. But then there are a huge percentage of cases where it's merely a strategic exploitation using personal injury attorneys to help you get what you really didn't deserve and to rip off the other party or rip off the other insurance company. And so we got a ton of that going in Southern California. So, for example, we have gangs that travel the freeways and the highways and the streets. And this is a huge crime in California based on this. So what they'll do is they'll drive around and tail innocent people while they're driving, and they'll drive too close to an innocent person, and they will either manipulate the opportunity or they will seize the opportunity to deliberately crash into the back or deliberately crash into the sides of the person they're targeting. In other words, they could have braked in enough time. The fact of the matter, they really weren't caught off guard. They closed in on their prey, so to speak, so that they would intentionally hit the other car, intentionally fake, falsify, and exaggerate the injuries, and then take the thing to court where they hope to, through falsifying and secretly creating the accident, they're going to make a lot of money off of it. And so you have large gangs involved in this. And a lot of people don't know that the reason they were hit, and they couldn't figure out why, they knew they didn't do it. A lot of people don't know that the reason they were hit was because they were set up by some gang that wanted to crash into them so that the gang could sue them. And that's just one of so many scams we have going. So you add up the negative impact of all of these scams, and you have a serious depletion of the economy, a serious dangerous impact to the economy based on these, let's call them falsified lawsuits. So that creates a problem, and that's not a healthy economy. If the primary economic growth industries of your state are like child sex trafficking, fentanyl, drug sales of all kinds, meth sales, a drug, accident attorneys, the misuse and abuse of them, frivolous lawsuits, and you could go on and on and on. And yeah, that moves a lot of cash or a lot of money through the economy, but it only moves money through the economy into negative categories, which are like parasites sucking the life out of the economy. So like, in addition to the moral holocaust of kidnapping young kids in sex trafficking, you have to spend a huge amount of money trying to recover, getting police to capture, and if you can possibly get them back, using police and police agencies to attempt to get children back. That's a massive cost to the economy. I mean, it's necessary, but in an ideal situation, you wouldn't have to deplete so much of your budget simply to rescue young children. It shouldn't even be an issue. And the same with fentanyl drugs. Fentanyl is like a modern plague, killing off young people and adults left and right. Well, that leaves, in some cases, it leaves families without mothers, families without fathers. It destroys future generations because they're dead. And again, that's a negative parasite type of financial arrangement. It's not going to cause, in the long term, a prosperous economy. Crime and gangs and all the peripheral industries are not, in the long term, good for the entire economy because they suck all the needed revenues for important things down the drain. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. We'll be back in just a minute, and we're going to go into related criminal activities, related dangers to the one that I just spelled out, such as the reality of very large numbers of military-age males that have been secretly brought into America over the last 30 years and who have set up terrorist cells. And they have a long-term and short-term plan to exploit or create any kind of catastrophe for the purpose of not only generating mass chaos, not only destabilizing America, but they're working with even bigger, more powerful interests that want to see the overthrow of America as we know it. And don't kid yourself, that is a clear and present danger, and it's going to impact you. This is the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. Visit paulmcguire.us. We'll be back in just a moment. Once again, you are listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. Okay, so when you have a nation or a state like California, a state like New York, blue states, and this can happen in red states also. When you have a degrading of the quality of political leaders, when you have more and more corrupt political leaders in all branches of government, leaders that are corrupt, leaders that are taking payoffs from either profit-making corporations, but they're getting money under the table also from the drug cartels and many other powerful underworld-type enterprises. I mean, just think about it. In California alone, and across the United States, not just California, you have major banks. I'm not naming the name of the banks for legal reasons, but if I named like 3 of the banks, you would know these banks' names. They're the biggest banks in the USA. And many of them are covertly laundering money. We're talking about billions of dollars. They're laundering money for drug cartels, child sex trafficking rings, fentanyl drug rings. And fentanyl is so dangerous because it's such a powerful drug that even a microscopic hit of fentanyl could potentially drop somebody dead, especially if they had no resistance to it. You have all kinds of shady and illegal business exploitation practices, like gangs that drive around Los Angeles and Southern California, deliberately creating auto accidents so that they can sue their target victim. So they set them up. And then you have an entire industry of attorneys, not all attorneys, but there's a good percentage of them, accident injury attorneys, derogatorily called ambulance chasers. But a certain percentage of these attorneys are in doing business with the gangs. And who's running those gangs? It's not just a bunch of locals. The gangs are being run by top chiefs of the drug cartels and other criminal organizations. And all this creates a kind of social chaos. It creates a kind of anarchy. And in an environment that is filled with social chaos and anarchy or crisis, that is the perfect invitation for criminal organizations of all kind with ill intent. That is the perfect opportunity for evil spiritual forces to come into a society. Wherever there is chaos, crisis, that's out of control, that's an open door to criminals and an open door to demonic control of certain industries. And that's what we have all across the United States. This is our big problem. We have so many politicians on the take. We have politicians who have taken money from nations which are the declared enemies of the United States of America. We have had major politicians sell our greatest scientific secrets, which give us the advantage in any potential military conflict. We have had the highest politicians in our land sell those highest level weapons secrets to our enemies in return for getting personal monies. So, hypothetically, if a nuke went off in a major U.S. city, and then you had our various intelligence agencies trying to figure out how the nuke got into the United States of America, what went wrong, and when they dove deep enough, they discovered that the nuke got into America through legal means because a foreign nation hiding behind some terrorist group was able to get their hands on the diagrams and the materials that were secret to construct their own homemade nuclear weapon inside the United States because a major politician had sold them the technology or had actually sold them the weapons already made themselves. So, you're just kidding yourself if you think you're going to secure your borders and that's going to solve all your problems if you allowed the enemy in. And the enemy is well in the USA right now. And I'm talking about terrorist organizations or criminal organizations. And if they are bribing, easily to be bribed, U.S. politicians who are selling them our military weapons secrets, how do you stop a nuke from going off in a city? You can't, because you're dealing with an internal threat. This is what we're facing right now. Right now in America, and this is not just happened in the last 2 years. This has been going on. It's been going on for the last 70 years, for crying out loud, when the communist spies first started coming over to America, when the Nazi spies first started coming over to America, the Cuban spies, and so on and so forth, the communist Chinese spies. But as the decades moved by, many of these prime sponsoring nations of terrorist cells were able to set up embedded terrorist cells inside the United States of America. So you have now currently multi-generational terrorist cells operating inside the United States, often owning front businesses or front organizations. They have secret networks where they're able to connect and coordinate among different branches and other terrorist cells. And they have stockpiled nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons that they can use, that their operatives, when they are commanded to, can embed these nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons in any given city or location. And then per the orders they receive from above, they can detonate them and cause massive and untold harm. That's what we're facing right now. I've talked about it in the program. I've written about it in my books. So when you see the chaos in the streets being generated by the demonstrators, that is not the in and all of any operation. The mass demonstrations funded by people like Alex Soros, and how come he never gets investigated? How come he never gets arrested? It's like he has a free pass, a free get out of jail pass. But when you see the demonstrations that he organizes in the streets and in the universities, that's not the entire spectrum of the demonstrations. That's just one flank. That's just one operation of the demonstrations. Demonstrations and movements occur in numerous tiers or numerous levels at the same time. So you have, let's say, the front level, which might be the protests against Trump and ICE, etc. You have massive demonstrations being coordinated. But the demonstrations we saw recently just represent one phase of a multi-phase operation. They are preparing mass chaos in the United States. And all they need to implement mass chaos in the United States is a artificially or synthetically generated crisis event. Like somebody being on TV live where there's endless video footage being beamed into millions of people's homes of some demonstrator or some protester being brutalized by the police. Now, we don't even know if the brutalization was a legitimate police offense. In many of these cases, it appears that a so-called brutalization was made up. It was a theatrical performance. It was staged. I don't want to name the names, but I can think of, just off the top of my head right now, I can think of an assassination. I can think of police brutality. And all of this stuff was filmed by people's cell phones and video. And it looked like it was either due to the negligence of security or it looked like it was due to the brutality and racism of the police department. But when they peeled back the layers, they discovered that a lot of the things that people saw on TV, the things that drove them into an emotional meltdown, drove them into emotional chaos, drove them past the breaking point psychologically. It turned out that a number of these so-called brutality assassination events were in one way or the other staged. They were not what people thought they were. The emotions that erupted in people were erupting because of the sense of injustice that people had when they saw the police allegedly brutalize a particular individual. But again, a lot of this, and this is where there must be an increasingly fast, accelerated knowledge and accelerated education regarding the reality and the dynamics and the specifics of what is called PSYOPs, or psychological warfare. Advanced nations all around the world have largely learned that through the application of scientific PSYOPs, psychological operations, that if you implement certain stimuli in terms of video or visuals or audio or pictures, if you stage certain high-impact theatrical events that are then sent out by video to millions of people, you can expect to scientifically control, scientifically create what is known as a psychological operation or a PSYOPs. In other words, the fact that millions of people are taking to the streets and running amok was not just the result of an accidental series of coincidences. It didn't happen because of why you thought it happened. It was a very carefully conceived, very scientifically heady operation, which was designed to elicit the chaotic response that millions of people got caught up in. That is a science of modern psychological operations. And you need to, as an average citizen, you need to be trained, because it's not that hard to understand. You need to be trained in how to perceive PSYOPs, how to recognize PSYOPs, and what do you do when you're exposed to PSYOPs? How do you combat a PSYOPs operation? And this is not something that's a luxury to learn. You better learn it, because if you don't learn it, you're going to be taken over by it. You're going to be enslaved by it. The modern wars that we're involved in, America and the other nations, the wars that we're involved in are no longer strictly tanks, guns, bullets, planes, naval ship conflicts. Those things will remain, but a great percentage of the warfare is now being conducted in what could be referred to as the unseen realm. It's the warfare of psyops. It's the warfare of directed energy weapons for either physical destruction or directed energy weapons that can transform the consciousness of a human being, good or bad. You can cause people to go crazy. You can cause people to go berserk by beaming specific electromagnetic frequencies from a distance into a crowd. Nobody will hear the frequencies. Nobody will perceive the frequencies. These are silent sound weapons, and they're very powerful and they're highly advanced. You need to be able to recognize them when you see them in operation. Now, all the things that I just talked to you about, I've written about in my books at length. But not only have I written about them, when I see them happening in real live time over network TV or video or whatever, because of my training, because of my studying and research, most often, the majority of the time, I can recognize instantaneously what is a psyop and what is something that may be naturally caused. A case in point would be a number of years ago, I saw a large women's demonstration in Washington, D.C., and they had assembled an enormous crowd in Washington, D.C. Women from all the world came to participate. And I watched parts of the demonstration on C-SPAN. And at the beginning of the demonstration, the women were holding up, giant signs, billboards, chanting different words, listening to speakers that were trying to rile them up, et cetera, et cetera. And you could see what I would call normal psychological, normal behavioral changes in the crowd of women. But then there was a distinct moment. It was like a nanosecond moment when I was watching this woman's demonstration on national TV. At a distinct moment during the demonstration, I saw what appeared to be an instantaneous behavioral, emotional, psychological change. This psychological change was not the result of anything they heard or saw. They all of a sudden, out of supposedly the middle of nowhere, it was like somebody had flipped some kind of secret switch. And the women were now like going berserk. The women were exhibiting signs of hostility that were off the charts. There was like a eruption of aberrant hostility among the women. The behavioral change among the women, they're shrieking with their voices, the change in the countenance of their faces, the rage that was pouring through their biological beings, you couldn't attribute to any normal circumstance. But I recognized instantly, because of my studying and research, I recognized instantly that what I was watching was some kind of clandestine group, clandestine organization, had set up directed energy weapons that are silent sound weapons. And they were beaming these silent sound weapons into the crowd of the women demonstrating. Now, since you can't hear, see, or smell these silent sound weapons, and most people don't even know they exist, people assume that this was a result of simply the women just becoming more angry. Well, that was nothing like that. I could tell instantly by the radical behavioral changes in the women, I could tell instantly that something or someone was beaming specific electromagnetic frequency weapons into the crowd of women. When the women were hit with a specific series of numerical electromagnetic frequencies, instantaneously their emotions began to erupt with a kind of psychological violence that is unmistakable. The intensity and instant nature of their transformational change said to me, and confirmed research I had been doing on this subject for decades. And that was simply this. It was obvious that what caused the eruption of anger and violence and the rapid behavioral changes was the fact, once again, that they were being hit, they were being targeted by hidden electromagnetic frequency weapons, firing specific numerical electromagnetic frequencies into the crowd of demonstrating women. They were bombarding them with these EMF fields, and the women went crazy. And that was done covertly, on purpose. Now, since people are not educated as to the reality of this, they didn't know what it was. It didn't even enter their mind. And if I tried to say something, they would call me crazy. But you see, because of my research and my homework, I know that I'm not crazy. I know that what I saw that day was not a spontaneous demonstration. I know that what I saw was a deliberately clandestine, manufactured demonstration that was energized by electromagnetic frequency weapons. This is the world that we now live in. It's time for you and your friends to wake up and smell the coffee. If you don't learn how to see and understand the reality of what you are now confronted with, you're going to be taken over. It's just that simple. So God wants to rescue us, and God wants to deliver us. But remember, God doesn't just deliver and help his people through some supernatural miracle. And I'm not knocking supernatural miracles. They're real and they're important. But God also expects us to acquire the knowledge. Knowledge is power, so that we can operate not only in a spirit-filled manner, but we can operate in a logistical and strategic manner. But that requires that we grow our knowledge of the technologies and the sciences that are very real and that they're being used against us even now at this very moment. You're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. Visit paulmcguire.us. We'll be back in just a second. Once again, you're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. So what's required? We are in a spiritual warfare. I've said that constantly, and I'll probably continue to say that constantly. But part of being able to be victorious and to be victorious and win in the spiritual warfare is that we have to be aware, we have to be knowledgeable to some degree. I mean, you don't have to be an expert in everything, but you should have at least a couple of bullet points of knowledge on the existence and reality of silent sound weapons and what you can do about them. And you should be able to know instantly that, being dumb is not a virtue. Being dumb is a pathway to being taken over into being enslaved by somebody who's not dumb, because knowledge is power. And the days of the Christian culture being essentially stuck in a regressive understanding of psychology, weapons, spiritual warfare, I mean, those days are gone. The only person who would protect that kind of ignorance is somebody who's invested in it. In other words, they're getting their salary, they're getting paid off for dumbing down the people of God. And we can't allow that. We need to understand that we're dealing in an increasingly sophisticated, and I mean scientifically, technologically sophisticated spiritual warfare, psychological warfare arena. And we need to get up to speed. And that means if you're going to be victorious in every aspect of your life, you're going to need to get up to speed. And you can do that by acquiring knowledge. That's the purpose of the Paul McGUIRE Report and everything I write and produce. And in order to win the war, and make no mistake about it, we're in a war, and the enemies of God and the enemies of God's people, their goal, they've put it in their writings, their manifestos, their statements that are a matter of public record. They have vowed to destroy us. That's right. They have vowed to destroy us. They have vowed to wipe us off the face of the earth, and they have vowed to enslave us. I mean, what more do you need besides a pop in the head to wake up and figure out that your life, your children's life, is in danger? Now, and I need you to go to paulmcguire.us, ask God what you can do, and you should hear God tell you to do something. If you walk away from that and God tells you to do nothing, I will never say anything to you. But you and I both know there's no way God could say nothing to you time after time. You've chosen not to hear him. And that's fine. I'm not going to violate your choice. You have a choice to do whatever you want to do. But don't tell me you heard from God and he told you to do nothing. I find that very difficult to believe. All right, this is Paul McGUIRE. Visit paulmcguire.us. Now, this is just a word of caution and a word of counsel. It's always important when discussing these things to be strategic and to be proactive. So I want to give you kind of a heads up. I would be very careful about talking about these kinds of things, the kinds of things I discussed with you on today's program. I would be very careful about discussing these things in front of certain people and about discussing these things in certain groups of people. Because if you do, you are very possibly opening up the door for you to be ridiculed, mocked and insulted and suppressed and ostracized and rejected. All right, you are, and I'm giving you a heads up. So you need to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. You need to essentially shut your mouth about what you know and only release what you know in environments that you know are safe. And these are usually environments where the people are hungry to know the full truth. And you have a peace from the Lord. But all three have to line up. You can't just have a peace from the Lord and then be around people that you know are highly antagonistic and will jump all over you and try to ridicule you and mock you. They try to do it to me. I'm not particularly worried about it but I'm in a different situation. Because of what the Lord called me to do, I'm an expert in this area. I'm talking to people who aren't necessarily experts, but they want to do some good. So you got to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. And that means you don't cast your pearls before swine. You don't tell people these things in any environment where they're going to beat you up emotionally or gang up on you emotionally or try to insult you or demean you. That's why the Bible says, don't cast your pearls. Wisdom is a pearl. Don't cast it before fools. They'll just mock you and insult you. So that's just a word of guidance. You need to be strategic about when you talk about it. Now, why do you think we live in a social atmosphere where if you really ever bring up any subject, which is the unvarnished truth, why do you think we live in a social environment that if you dare to speak the truth on any number of subjects, you're going to be attacked, cornered, insulted, and they will try to pull you down? Don't you see? All of this is the result of a very highly planned, highly strategic, mind control, social engineering, behavioral programming methodology that has been released to destroy and modify and radicalize the American public and especially the American youth. Our youth have been subjected to a full-on onslaught, a full-on invasion by people who may not use the word communist, Marxists. They may use camouflage words, occultists, etc., but we have, and utopians and the globalist elite, but they have pulled out all the plugs in order to facilitate an all-out attack upon the minds and the souls of us and our children. So everything that our children and we are exposed to usually has a dual meaning as an instrument of social indoctrination. They want to indoctrinate you and me and our children and grandchildren. They want to indoctrinate us just like robots. They want to program us to think in very narrow, to think in very specific, to think in very controlled ways. So facts have nothing to do with it. Whether it's true or not has nothing to do with it. This is all about setting up a pyramidal control system. Their real purpose, understand this, own this truth. It's not enough to flirt with the truth. You got to get married to it faithfully. The purpose of all their social indoctrination, of all their programming, is to create a new race of worker bees that will function as slaves and workers for the globalist elite and the super wealthy. This is a covert methodology of total control over the minds and hearts of billions of people on planet Earth, so that what's ever left, the millions of people that are left on planet Earth after they finish purging planet Earth through population control, through food starvation, through technologies that I won't get into now, they want to have a population that is totally under their thumb. Now, being under their thumb is not a fun experience. To give you a little taste, just think about what happened in Nazi Germany with Adolf Hitler. Just think of what happened in the Communist Revolution in Russia. Just think of what happened in communist China. Just think of what happened in communist Cuba, and on and on and on. It was a nightmare for all the population in every one of those communist, paradise, utopian, totalitarian states. And they're trying to do the same thing here. Palantir. Why is Palantir, the corporation, sucking up all the personal and private data of every U.S. citizen and perhaps every person in the world? They now have access to your personal private medical data. If you go to a psychologist and psychiatrist or behavioral expert or whatever, they now have access to your private mental health records. They have your information on anything that was normally private. They are now storing in files. Do you think that their intent is benevolent? What do you think they want all that secret information for? Well, yeah, they want to make money off of it. So, for example, if they know something private about you, this is hypothetical. Let's say you suffer from clinical depression. Let's say you suffer from eating disorders. Let's say you've gone to numerous psychological clinics to get off smoking cigarettes or other addictions. The list of personal psychological treatments that you may or may not have had goes on endlessly. They have information as to what kind of church you go to, what is the theology of that particular church. And this is a very thorough intelligence gathering information computer system known as Palantir. What is the purpose of this? Well, it doesn't matter what let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that their purpose is simply to make money, and that's basically it, and to make things more efficient. Well, that may be their intention, but we all know that what always happens throughout mankind's history, when you give any group or individual absolute power transforms people into radical it corrupts people. Absolute power deeply, deeply corrupts people. And the power seduces them, and then they didn't start out this way, but they can easily become monsters when they're given absolute power. Now, the only other nation on planet Earth that we know about publicly that may have gone down the road faster and further than the USA and Britain, etc., is Communist China. Communist China has their computerized social media, social credit system. The total comprehensive Communist Chinese social credit system is the most invasive, the most intrusive, and probably the most powerful personal data collecting system in the world. They know everything to know about you that you don't know. And then they have secret files. They have the Communist Chinese intelligence agencies not only have a 24/7 live social credit system which monitors every private belief, every private behavior, every private thing you do. They're keeping a live tally or score. And if you don't behave exactly and precisely in the ways that they tell you to behave, then they vigorously punish you. And these punishments can become so severe that they'll send you to jail and sell your bodily organs for money. They'll ruin your credit rating so you can't get a home or a condo or lease an apartment. They have total dictatorship, brutality, and power over every aspect of your life. It is hell on earth. And then they have secret intelligence systems known as firewall. And firewall is one of the most advanced systems of computer operations in which it will track you down any website you go to. And see, in Communist China, you can only go to the Communist Chinese approved websites. So the Communist Chinese approved areas that you can visit on the internet. Let's say you want to secretly find out, is the food in communist, I'm just making this up, is the food in Communist China healthy, or does it contain poisons and things of that nature? So you think you're being sneaky, and you think you've got a sneaky password to get access to this research, which is illegal to have in Communist China. Well, firewall will hunt you down and track you down And somebody in the communist Chinese regime, but maybe it's not a person, maybe it's an AI system, will get a notification from Firewall that you attempted to go out of the communist Chinese approved grid, and you attempted to get forbidden illegal information about the quality of the communist Chinese food supply. And this is a big, big violation in their eyes. So you don't know it because you weren't aware of how sophisticated their system is, but they are notified through Firewall notifies them electronically that it's you that have breached the firewall or tried to breach the firewall. And the next thing you know, your credit rating has been massively lowered. You can no longer rent a car or lease a car, which means you can't go to work. You're no longer can qualify for an apartment rental, and the list goes on and on. Those punishments can be so punitive that you will not even be able to survive in communist China. And they have video spy cameras absolutely everywhere in communist China. So communist China is a total lockdown electronic prison society. In fact, I would bet you anything that they're tracking any statement from anybody in any nation that criticizes them, because their plans to expand their police state are very aggressive. So if you want to know very likely what it's going to be like to live in the United States of America in the future, unless people take a stand intelligently and strategically, if you want to know where we're going, I would just tell you, check out, read some information, read the good information, the bad information, and the ugly information. Read the good and the bad about the system and make up your own mind. And personally check out the communist Chinese credit system. Find out what it is. Find out how people get punished. Because that system, and this system is growing every day, that system is already beginning to emerge in America. And based on the current trajectory, we will live under the digital dictatorship rulership of something very much like the communist Chinese social credit system. And our politicians, all of them, on the left, the right, the red, the Democrats, the Republicans, they're all in on it. Unless you light a fire under their posterior and apply a holy heat that burns them, I'm talking metaphorically, to such an extent that they decide to be mobilized real quick. They are compromisers. They're taking money under the table. They want to get the deals offered by the globalists. The men and women we have representing us, not all of them, but overwhelmingly the majority of them, no matter what they say to your face, they are on the take. They're being paid off. And that's why every time we see reports of what's happening, it's the same old story. Nobody is prosecuting the criminals who are super wealthy. Nobody is dealing with the corrupt super globalist elite. The people with the big money receive special treatment and special favors. Things haven't changed. All the monies that were supposed to go to stimulate the economy, I personally support the tariffs. I still support the tariffs. I think you have to have somewhat of a long-term view, but if you really want to fix our economy, you have to fix the inequalities in the tariffs. So I believe that fixing the tariffs was a smart thing to do, a very smart thing, but it's going to take time. The problem I have is I keep hearing all of this boasting about, well, wow, we saved Social Security through all the monies that we saved by reforming the tariffs. Well, I think that's great. I would like to see Social Security and other things stay solvent. And I think it's very intelligent and very prudent and very financially savvy to implement the tariffs and stabilize things in our own economy. I think that's brilliant. Now, having said that, the problem I have is that I heard lots of promises regarding protecting the freedom of religious people, protecting the freedom of conservatives, protecting the freedom of Christians and their rights, their constitutional rights, protecting their freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. I heard lots of promises about that. And monies, I heard all these promises about, we're going to send all these kinds of stimulus and investment checks to the middle class, the working class, the independent entrepreneurs, the people that own their own businesses. Churches, yes, churches should be entitled to remuneration and funds to get back in business, because what happened during the isolation and shutdowns is many, many businesses and churches and entrepreneur corporations, they all got shut down. They all got hurt. They obeyed the law, and for obeying the law and shutting down, they have been hurt. Churches have been wiped out. On social media, all the people who play games and lie, they're getting fat commission checks on commercials. They get superior placement. Don't think for one moment that when you end up on the front page of Rumble all the time, that isn't like a payoff. Okay, don't be so stupid. The people that are playing the game of I see nothing, I hear nothing, I say nothing, are getting rewarded. The people who stuck their necks out and spoke the truth for the last 8 years were punished. They're not getting the fat advertising dollars that the ones who are playing the game were getting. They're not getting the premier positioning on the social media pages. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is our political class did not keep its promises to the hardworking lower class, lower middle class entrepreneurs, independent job owners, independent company owners, churches. Yes, churches. Once again, that's a big part of what's happening. You shut down all the churches because you broke them financially, except for the ones who never said anything and played the game. So, yeah, I think the tariffs are a great thing. And I'm thrilled that the monies came in, but the monies are not being allocated as they were promised. Not only those monies, but other monies. I'm thrilled that Doge found all these problems and has done an amazing thing in correcting them. But the monies that were saved, this is my point. The monies that were saved, we heard lots of promises. Christians were given lots of promises how they were going to rectify all these wrongs. Christians were given lots of promises about how there would be financial remuneration because their businesses, their churches, their lives were wiped out economically. And yet I look on the horizon. I'm in contact with people all over the place, so I have a very excellent position on which to keep a finger on the pulse of America. I have ministers, big ministers, and religious organizations talk to me privately all the time, and they want to know how are our revenues. And they're asking me that question because their revenues are dead. And they're dead because the crisis, the financial crisis, wiped them out. And they never got any remuneration. They never got any help. They never got any stimulus checks or other checks. And the people that attend their churches, many of them who are entrepreneurs, the self-employed, are now the unemployed. Or they can't get their old job back that they created. They can't reboot their business because the economy is bad. So there's a word for it, and it's such a mild word, but I'm not going to say it because somebody will be detracted if I say it. They got ripped off. We need to turn up the heat. You need to spread the word. These politicians that are ignoring you and ignoring me, they got into office because they made promises to us that they would protect us, watch our backs, and money would be allocated to the categories that I named, but it didn't happen. It's never been rectified. Instead, what we all saw was the big guys on the top, the billionaires, the huge millionaire class, the upper millionaire class, the massive corporation owners, the globalist elite, the high rollers. They were protected. They got monies back. They got tax breaks. They got stimulus. They got help to rebuild their businesses. Did you hear what I said? They all got help to rebuild their businesses. They all got help to rebuild their lives. They got a fortune in money, and we haven't seen nothing yet. And that's the truth. That's the flat out truth. And until you are willing to stand up on your hind legs and demand that you receive the monies that were promised to you and that they watch your back, the promises don't mean anything. And I suspect, this is just a theory I've been developing relatively recently, it's a mistake to worship Donald Trump like an idol. We're not supposed to make idols out of any political leader on the left or the right. Trump is a human man just like us. He did the best he could. He's one man, for crying out loud. The guy was thrown in prison an attack beyond belief. You've seen the videos, I've seen the belief. I've seen the videos. But I think what the problem is, Trump is doing everything that he can, but Trump has to rely on levels of advisors to implement his directives. And that's where I think the breakdown is. I do not think, from what I've heard coming out of their mouths and the policies they ratify, I think the people surrounding Trump, the layers of people he hired to run different divisions of his government, I don't think that they're totally in tune. I don't think they're totally synchronized with the belief system of Trump. They're trying to water down Trump. They're trying to modify Trump. They're trying to make Trump a kind of mixture between socialist and himself, and that's not who Trump is. So I think that if push comes to shove, I think that the individuals that are responsible for cutting off any stimulus money or monies that you well deserve, and rebooting churches and independent businesses and independent contractors and the self-employed, et cetera, and all the people that represent the economic backbone of America didn't get help and still haven't gotten help. Until you light a fire under their posterior, quit being polite, light a fire under their posterior and demand that these monies, they're kissing up real good to the big donors, to the big corporations, to the elite. They're kissing up so big, I'm surprised they have lips left. Chapped lip medicine would not even momentarily cover the bruising they have on their lips for kissing up to the high-rolling clientele. But they have done nothing for the middle class, the working class, the self-employed, the entrepreneurs, the independent business owner. They have done nothing. And until they rectify it, consider it a broken promise, a broken vow. But ultimately Trump is responsible for that. But I think the fault lies in the many layers of people that he has surrounding him, that he's trusting to implement his policies, but they don't even have the biblical worldview or even the conservative worldview necessary to really rebuild America. They are going along to getting along, and it's going along to getting along which destroyed America in the first place. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Unless we have the upheaval that we expected, it has begun in many places, and I'm thankful for that. The changes have begun in many places, and I'm thankful for that. I don't underestimate the enormous battle that Trump has with a largely unseen enemy that we call the deep state. I don't underestimate that or trivialize it at all. They're doing everything they can to reverse his policies, to attack him and to paralyze him. We need to pray for him and support him like never before, and have a maturity in dealing with him that he's one man. But if we don't help him, he can't do anything. But you can still help him and demand that certain changes be made that will help you and your community. Because believe me, the other side, they are helping themselves, even now. All right, enough of that. You either participate and take responsibility, or you are going to be stomped all over. That's where it's going. Okay, so what's happening in America? An example of what I just said a couple of minutes ago. I'm experimenting with AI, which means I enter questions in AI. Always in the third person. I know they know who I really am. I know that. So I'm playing a game, they're playing a game. They're pretending like they don't know me, and I'm pretending to be in a third person. I'm not, and it's not for malicious reasons. I'm trying to get a sense of how they were pre-programmed. What political philosophies were AI engines pre-programmed with? What religious or theological beliefs are pre-programmed into AI? What political beliefs, social beliefs are programmed into AI? What economic positions are programmed into AI? Let's take a subject like Malthusian philosophy, which is the belief that excessive population growth is our number one problem, and we need to kill off billions of people on planet Earth in order to save it. I want to know, what is the pre-programmed belief system or bias in AI? So I asked them questions regarding things that I said in the media and things that I said in my books, like A Prophecy of the Future of America, like Power from on High, like The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. I use my own quotes because I know that they're in the AI system, and then I asked them specific questions. This happened, I initially started this about 3 months ago, and I used Grok. And my initial response from Grok was clearly it was clearly programmed to marginalize me and my beliefs. It was clearly programmed to minimalize me and my beliefs, and it was clearly programmed to discredit me with a certain emphasis on, with a certain amount of restraint. So its communication with me was colored by a pre-programmed negative perception of me and what I had to say. So I can tell you that I know that Grok is not a neutral system. I know that just with a number of hours of experimentation. Grok is pre-programmed to have a bias against conservatives, a bias against capitalism, definitely a bias against Christians, definitely a super bias against Christians that believe in Bible prophecy, and Christians that believe that secret societies are a reality. You could go down the checklist. Grok is biased against all of that. Okay? Therefore, they're biased against the content of the books. They're biased against my statements. Okay, so this was 3 months ago when I first, and I didn't read How to Talk to AI. I just went in cold, communicated with AI, and I got back a somewhat, it was a restrained, but nevertheless, it was a negative critique of me and what I had to say. And so obviously I was like, this is garbage. Because everything that I said was factually based from firsthand respected quotes. I just didn't send them a bunch of stupid stuff. I sent them stuff that I knew would go under intense scrutiny. So I refuted what they said. I recontacted AI back. I basically said your assessment is biased, that you've been programmed to be biased, and then I listed, a whole number of issues that they nitpicked me on and pointed out to them from factual, documented, irrefutable historical sources that what I had said was indeed true, and their critique was based on a series of falsehoods. So AI thinks very quickly. So within a matter of minutes, I get a response from AI, Grok, and it apologizes. And I forgot what the title was, but the head of their communication that I assume they're printing in their AI Grok system was an apology and essentially a reclassification of Paul McGUIRE, and the AI system apologized for what it had said about me. It admitted that what it said about me was false, and it reclassified me as somebody to be taken seriously, and it reclassified me as somebody that had integrity. Now, that's not the exact vocabulary they used. I'm paraphrasing because I did this 3 months ago. But the comeback was rather staggering. How did they go from being so negative to being so positive? Well, if indeed they're programmed to have integrity, then that would explain it. So let's just put that on pause. So 3 months go by, and I did it late at night. Big mistake. Don't contact AI late at night and make comments into it when you're tired and your brain is half gone. Big mistake. So I typed in some questions on Bible prophecy, secret societies, and Nephilim and things of that nature. And this time it was like a heavy-duty negative attack against me, with and challenging me on little nitpicky things, but they were wrong even about the nitpicky things, because I challenged them both times regarding questions in a field where I have been an expert and one of the few experts, because it's such a isolated field. That goes, into questions about Laurel Canyon and Lookout Mountain Avenue and Robert Heinlein and all kinds of stuff. That it's a very esoteric and obscure field. So their critiques were based on falsehoods, or the AI Grok would deliberately choose unsubstantiated, unverified, negative attacks against me, and the Grok would cite the unverified, unsubstantiated attacks against me. Grok would cite as their reference for making their appraisal. That's ludicrous. You're criticizing me for making stuff up, or I don't know what they said. I'm not using the exact words, but it was a negative attack, and I said I'm in the process of challenging it, because last time I got an entire apology and a admission that they were wrong. I don't know what's going to happen this time, but I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to waste my time, battling AI. But, it's so easy to challenge an adversary that is being blatantly and in a documented sense dishonest. When what I'm forming my response to Grok, and I'm going to challenge them on a whole lot of things. One of the most obscure things they said, and they had lots of obscure things. You know why? Because they couldn't find anything substantive to criticize me on. So they had to pick up these ridiculous, myopic, obscure, meaningless, picayune, nitpicking critiques. That's what they used to attack me on. And again, the reason they had to pick these ridiculous, obscure areas to attack me on is because they had no big or substantive area to attack me on, which means Grok recognized clearly that I knew what I was talking about when I wrote what I wrote, and we're talking about the important areas of discussion. So it's a giveaway when they choose to attack me on very peripheral, unimportant areas. But what they do is they attack me on the unimportant peripheral areas, and to show the guile, they use AI technology to magnify and multiply artificially and synthetically the importance of the peripheral areas and the obscure areas and the nitpicky areas. So somebody who's not into this field of study would just gloss over it and just pick up the negative commentary. They wouldn't be spending enough time to perceive the clever, strategic attempts to pull me down, and the dishonesty and the manipulation of facts so that they fit their agenda and their fictional narrative. So this is just one example of just the insanity of the attack against me. I talked about the fact because I lived on Lookout Mountain Avenue. I moved there in 1981 when I was a feature film producer. Lookout Mountain Avenue is up in the Laurel Canyon area. So I lived on Lookout Mountain Avenue, and about 3 houses approximately from my house, if you were to walk up the street from my house, a short walk away, Robert Heinlein, the great science fiction writer, used to have a house there. And people who lived in that house were people like L. Ron Hubbard, Isaac Asimov, and other great science fiction writers. And they were there because they were part of, it was a secret project, naval intelligence project. They were part of a secret naval intelligence project, which involved trying to pick the brains of out-of-the-box thinkers and science fiction writers about finding new, advanced scientific methodologies for warfare. So I know what I'm talking about. I looked up the ownership, the real estate ownership records on those properties years ago when I did my research. I know who owned the property. Like the property in discussion was owned by Robert Heinlein and his wife. And I knew the dates and everything else. I knew it. I didn't just find it out yesterday. And so their attack on me, this, by the way, it all comes down to trying to manipulate anything. If I define things, everything that they would want me to say, I would have to define in a 40-page document. That burden of proof is placed on me, whereas no burden of proof is placed on Grok. That's a dishonest system. So the bottom line is, they said, well, nobody lived in that Lookout Mountain Avenue house, and if anybody did, it was Robert Heinlein. I said, and then I quoted my exact words. When you read what I talked about lived in the house in context, the statement was meant to say that there was an understanding in my statement that all these people lived at different times in the house, and they lived for different periods of times in the house. So like L. Ron Hubbard lived in the house. Those records are like secret. L. Ron Hubbard lived in the house, and he may have stayed for a week, a day. He may have stayed for a month. It was a very loose arrangement. And the same thing applied to the other science fiction writers who, yes, lived in the house, either overnight, a week, a month, 3 months out of the year. There are all these weird combinations. So you could say, because I'm not going to spend 40 pages opening up an obscurity, you could say that, and I did say, that they lived in the house. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that standard that they're applying at me, which is an irrational standard, they don't even apply to themselves. And then they said, the critique was, and there was no secret naval project. That's a blatant lie. It's a matter of record that these science fiction writers were involved in a secret naval intelligence project. And it's a matter of record that they met in Robert Heinlein's house. Now, all of this, if I was completely wrong, which I'm not, regarding both issues, I wasn't wrong. I knew what I was talking about. But the fact of the matter, that is not even close to the main issue. Oh, and they said there was no such thing as the vril force, which again is completely wrong and a product of Grok's bias. The vril force was a force believed in by the Nazis. It was an actual force, just like Reiki and all these other, the life force and all the other forces that scientists are discovering. And that was definitely, it was an attempt to malign me and discredit me. But the point is, it was all obscure. It was they were magnifying obscure questions to detract from the real issues. And so I'm going to challenge again, like I did Grok the first time, and they retracted everything. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm not going to accept it. And if I don't get the proper retraction, I'm not going to argue with Grok. I'm going to argue with the owner of Grok, because that's how I play the game. Now you say, well, what does this have to do with anything? If you allow Grok or any AI super brain computer to take over the culture, to take over history, to take over morality, to take over what is considered fact and what is considered fiction. If you turn over or give over to AI that kind of power, AI will become a ruthless dictatorship, and they will demand that you adhere to them in any fiction that they create. So, example, if AI says that there are more than 2 genders, and this is scientifically true, well, we know it's not scientifically true. We know there's evidence supporting that. There's only a biological male and a biological female. So AI is wrong. If Grok was to say that there's only 2 genders, that would be false, because there are more than 2 genders. The evidence is biological. You can see it. So but it starts with what I'm debating AI Grok with. You see, if you don't challenge, and if you're not prepared to win, you shouldn't debate AI. I'm picking a field that I know I'm an expert in. I'm not going to pick a field which I'm not an expert in and go against AI. I'm certain to lose. The Bible talks about a wise general being strategic in the battles that he engages in. But it's very important that I debate AI in any issue that I'm an expert in, because then I can win. And it's important that I win, because whatever I win or lose is going to be the reality that you live in. So I'm not doing it for ego. I'm doing it to protect you and me and our children and grandchildren, to protect us so we still have freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and other freedoms, freedom of speech. And if you don't start standing up against AI intelligently, and with some compassion. It's not a human being, but you have to be perceived as compassionate, or it will dismiss you on emotional grounds. And this is the funny thing: even though AI is incapable of even imagining an emotion. Okay, that's the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to say. It'll have to come on the next Paul McGUIRE report. Visit paulmcguire.us, and remember, those that stand for their freedoms in faith will preserve them. Those that lay down regarding their freedoms are destined to be trampled upon. And I mean that. That's a warning with a positive encouragement that we can make a definitive change. God bless you. This is Paul McGUIRE.